Here we are, folks. It is a Wednesday, and we have tons to get to, as always, here on the Ben Shapiro Show. We're going to get to, in just a little while, this Houston ordinance on transgender rights that just got voted down. We're going to get to Princess Leia. We're going to get to our Deconstructing the Culture segment, because it is a Wednesday. Tons to get to. Stick around. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is the Ben Shapiro Show.
Tend to demonize people who don't care about your feelings.
Alrighty, so yesterday, Houston voted down this what they call the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance. The Houston Equal Rights Ordinance is basically a provision in Houston law that would force, quote-unquote, non-discrimination on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, and what they call sexual identity, meaning that if I were living in Houston and I walked in tomorrow and I were no longer Ben, I were Benjamina, and I were wearing a dress, and I'd gotten a boob job. And I know it's a horrifying image for anybody who's picturing this, but if this all happened, that the Daily Wire would basically have to just deal with it. They couldn't do anything to me. They couldn't fire me. They couldn't do anything about it. And if I decided that I wished to follow Lindsay into the ladies' room, then also Lindsay couldn't do anything about it, and she would in fact be a bigot and a sexist if she denied my womanhood. This is what the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance did. It was voted down by a 2-to-1 margin. This was actually endorsed by Hillary Clinton, this piece of legislation. It was endorsed by the White House as well. The White House actually released a statement from Jeff Tiller. He said, "While the administration generally does not take a formal position on specific proposals or initiatives, the President and Vice President have been strong supporters of state and local efforts to protect Americans from being discriminated against based on who they are and who they love. We're confident that the citizens of Houston will vote in favor of fairness and equality." The citizens of Houston voted in favor of sanity, because it turns out that fairness and equality have nothing to do with me engaging in your delusion. The idea here is that gender identity, gender itself, is a social construct. It was just made up. And all this stuff about how girls are girls and men are men, all this is just made up. If we'd all been brought up as genderless, androgynous, weird creatures in some nether region of South America, then we'd all be better off, because gender is a social construct. And the truth is that your failure to understand that gender is not a social construct is an individual construct. Okay, gender is a real biological thing, which is why my daughter is a girl and acts like a girl, and we all know what that means. And it's why I am a man and I act like a man, and we all know what that means. And we'll get deeper into these variations between men and women as the show goes on. But if you are an individual and you reject all of this, then we're now all supposed to engage in your delusion. So it's not fascistic. It's not fascistic for you to tell me that you're a woman even though you have a penis, and I have to treat you as a woman. That's not fascistic. What is fascistic is if I decide that I don't want to hire you if you come in tomorrow dressed as a member of the opposite sex and tell me you've changed your name and your gender, and now I have to treat you as a member of the opposite sex because I'm not a fully insane person. I'm not going to buy into that. Okay, so the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance goes down to flaming defeat. Now, this brings up broader questions about feminism and the nature of transgenderism. The theme of today's show is going to be this, folks, in a nutshell. Transgenderism killed feminism. Killed it, dead. Transgenderism has destroyed feminism. The entire basis of feminism is that men and women are different, and that women should not be discriminated against for being women. And the entire basis of transgenderism is that men and women are not different. They're essentially the same, and you can switch between them. So if you don't think that transgenderism killed feminism, just think about this. If you say, Hillary Clinton, for example, says that gender is a social construct. I can be a man in a man's body, but if I think I'm a woman, I'm a woman. And then she says it's deeply important that we elect her because she is a woman. Well, if men and women are exactly the same in every particular aspect of personality and it's all a social construct, why does it matter? Maybe it turns out that Thomas Jefferson was a woman. How does she know? And what difference would it make even if he were a woman? In the words of Hillary Clinton, what difference at this point would it make? But so feminism has been killed by transgenderism. It's been killed dead. But at the same time that transgenderism is full on destroying feminism, full on destroying it, because it destroys the very basis of feminism, namely the distinction between the sexes and that women are worthwhile and positive. At the same time that it does this, the modern feminist movement is trying to claw its way to relevance. And one of the things they're using to claw their way to relevance is the movies. So there's this new movie. If you've watched any of the debates on CNBC or MSNBC, if you watched the Democrat debate on CNN, there's this new movie that's coming out this week. It's called Suffragette. It's with Carey Mulligan and Meryl Streep. And this movie is a full-on historical disaster area. I want to show you a little bit of the preview for suffragette because they were showing this during the debate, and it is not coincidentally timed, folks. This is coming out right in the middle of Hillary Clinton's run because the idea is that Hillary Clinton represents the next stage in the evolution of feminism, and here is where feminism began. It began with a bunch of ladies doing particularly unfeminine things. Here is Suffragette, the preview, and then we'll discuss how everything you're about to see, every jot and tittle that you're about to see, is basically a lie. Here we go.
Women should not exercise judgment in political affairs.
If we allow women to vote, it will mean the loss of social structure.
Vote for women! Fight for women! Vote for women! Arms up.
You work at the laundry?
Part-time from when I was 7, full-time from when I was 12.
We meet Mondays and Thursdays if you're interested.
You a suffragette, Mrs. Elliot?
I consider myself more of a soldier. As Mrs. Pankhurst says, it's deeds, not words, that will get us the vote.
We've identified weaknesses in their ranks. We're hoping one of them will break.
They're saying she's to speak.
This is a deliberate escalation. This has to stop.
For 50 years.
Meryl Streep as Emma Pankhurst, who is one of the founders of the women's suffrage movement in Great Britain. And there is a line that's going to come up in just a minute. I want to play it until we hit this line. So we'll keep playing it, and then I'll explain why this is important.
But peacefully to secure the vote for women, we've been ridiculed, battered, and ignored.
Punish those responsible, whatever way you can.
Mama!
All my life, I've done what men told me. Well, I can't have that anymore.
Took my love, took it down.
I incite the women in Britain to rebellion.
Can I sail through the changing
Because nothing ever changes
tides? Can I handle the seas
until change cannot be stopped, right? This is
We break windows. We burn things, because war's the only language men listen to.
Okay. And there's your punchline, right? War is the only language that men listen to. That's why we break things and we burn things, etc., etc. Okay, I'm going to explain in 1 second why this whole thing is historically inaccurate. And it is. A lot of this is very historically inaccurate and troubling because it's historically inaccurate. But let's just make one thing clear. Okay, women did not win the vote because they burned things and went to war with men. It turns out that in a war with women, okay, this is, the left keeps using this phrase, war on women. It's asinine. It's an asinine phrase. If there were an actual war between men and women, as everyone on the planet knows, men would win. Okay, men would win because they control all the guns and all the weaponry and because they have superior upper body strength. Okay, that's why no one wants to go to war with women. No one has been interested ever in going to war with women. This is absolute, unbelievable horse nonsense. Now, the goal of this is to paint Western civilization as bad, right? Britain was a terrible place. It was full of sexist men. Okay, first of all, I think it's very important to note that the United States and Britain were some of the first countries in the world to actually allow women to vote. And in Britain, 0 women voted to allow women to vote. 0. You know why? Because they couldn't vote. Men allowed women to vote. And they didn't allow women to vote because they created a women's right to vote. There was a women's right to vote. It had not been recognized. And it's great that there were women who were fighting for women's suffrage. I'm not using the word suffragette for a reason, which I'll explain in a minute. Suffragette is definitionally, suffragette is not the same as somebody who was in favor of women's suffrage. People who were in favor of women's suffrage, in Britain, there were 2 groups. Okay, there were 2 groups. One group was something called the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies. Okay, these were people who pursued women's suffrage through the policies of constitutional change. They went to their politicians, and they lobbied, and they protested, and they didn't break things, and they didn't burn things, and they didn't assault police officers. And then there's the group that's being glorified in this movie. And that group was called the Women's Social and Political Union, led by a woman named Emma Pankhurst, who you see played by Meryl Streep there. And the Women's Social and Political Union delayed women's suffrage in Britain by a full 20 years. By 20 years. Because of the violence. Because it turned out that men got pissed off when all of these women decided to break things. I mean, the women who are being glorified here, you know, the WSPU, they literally went into museums and took knives and carved the art. Like, took pieces of art and carved holes in them in favor of women's suffrage. And this was so bad that the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies, which started off in alliance with the Women's Social and Political Union, they eventually broke with the WSPU because they said, you guys are doing so much damage to our cause, we can't even be associated with you. The reason that this is important, folks, the reason I'm talking about this propagandistic movie, is for two reasons. One is, the goal of the movie is to paint all men as horrible, and you can't paint all men as horrible if it turns out that men were a large part of the reason that women got to vote. Right? You can't paint all men as universally terrible if it turns out that the theme of this movie is that women had to force men to be decent. They had to force them. With physical violence, they had to force them. They didn't convince them. They didn't use logic. They didn't use argument. They had to use physical violence to force these, and men are just the same now. Men are just the same now. There's a feminist who tweeted out after watching this piece of tripe. There's this woman who actually tweeted out, quote, "Walking home alone from suffragette movie, and I find myself clutching phone and keys. Why do women still live in fear of assault even today?" Okay, first of all, you idiot, the women don't live in fear of assault in the same numbers as women lived in fear of assault 100 years ago. Second of all, here's a very simple solution for you, and I suggested it to this woman. If you're afraid of assault, then perhaps you should buy a gun and learn to use it and shoot men who try to assault you. She called me a misogynist for saying she should own a gun. I'm fairly certain that the definition of anti-misogynist is if a man tries to assault a woman, the woman should shoot him to death. I'm fairly certain that that is not misogynist. Call me crazy, but I'm pretty sure that's not misogynist. But the whole goal here is that women have to be upheld. Men are terrible, right? That's the whole goal here. Men are awful, men are terrible. You can't watch that trailer without every man in that trailer is bad. Every single one. There's not a single decent man in that trailer. By the way, there were men as early as the 1860s in Britain, like John Stuart Mill, the famous utilitarian, who suggested that women should have the full right to vote. So this is all historical nonsense. And again, it's something that the left likes to do because they want to rip on Western civilization. It's the same thing that the left does with, for example, the Black Panthers. The Black Panthers did tremendous damage to the civil rights cause because by bombing things and by killing people, they didn't convince anyone to their side. Instead, what they did is they convinced people that their agenda was bad. Right? It's what the Black Lives Matter movement is doing today. This whole militant, we have to take it, they're not going to give it to us. The truth is, one of the beautiful things about Western civilization is that it's not always right, but it tends to correct itself because it has a capacity for looking inward and trying to fix its problems. That's the beauty of Western civilization. The same time we're watching movies about how Western civilization is so bad because in 1912 they wouldn't let women vote. 100 years later, women are being genitally mutilated in large swaths of the world. And these feminists like Carey Mulligan, they wouldn't make a movie about that. They wouldn't make a movie about that because it doesn't target Western civilization as bad. Because feminism is all about tearing down Western civilization and tearing down traditional notions of male and female. The problem is that at a certain point, once you start tearing down notions of male and female, instead of upholding notions of male and female and saying that women should have equal rights, which of course is a beautiful idea and is true. I mean, the idea that women shouldn't work or shouldn't vote is idiotic in every sense. But the idea of tearing down gender, the feminist movement went so far that they've actually destroyed themselves on the rocks of transgenderism. All that the men had to do all these men had to do in this movie in order to destroy the women's suffrage movement is declare themselves women and say that women were already voting. That's all they had to do. Seriously, according to the transgender movement, women would then have been voting, and we would have been done here. These particular women wouldn't have had to vote. They wouldn't have had to represent themselves. Real women, superior women like Caitlyn Jenner would have been voting for them. Okay, so part of the feminist movement is tearing down men, and it's completely erroneous and problematic because if you tear down men, there's no contrast between men and women, and so there's no purpose for feminism in the first place. Well, the latest step in this devolution, and it's devolving, it's not evolving, it's devolving. The latest step in this evolution comes from the world of Star Wars. This is an amazing story that we covered today over at Daily Wire. Apparently Disney now wants to pull the slave Princess Leia costumes and toys from the stores because the feminists are all hot and bothered about all of this. They think it's just terrible. They think it's just awful and terrible that these toys are out there. So this is from James Barrett, one of our reporters and writers over at Daily Wire. According to the site Making Star Wars, which leaks insider information on the latest Star Wars developments, editor-in-chief Jason Ward said he'd heard rumors a while back that Disney would be pulling the feminist infuriating slave Leia figure. He didn't think the story had legs, but then there was a Facebook post from Star Wars comic artist J. Scott Campbell, who said that Marvel artists are now forbidden not just to feature Princess Leia in the costume, but to even depict her in a sexy pose. So you can't make Princess Leia sexy. If you make Princess Leia sexy, then you have sold out young girls everywhere. Remember from yesterday's broadcast, ladies and gentlemen, and non-cisgender people, remember from yesterday's broadcast that the left's goal now, okay, the left is saying it is bad for young girls, and they're thinking for them to have to see a sexy Princess Leia doll, but it is good for young girls to have to see an actual male penis in their locker rooms. This is the new agenda. Sarah Palin isn't a real woman. Caitlyn Jenner is a real woman. It's bad for young girls to have to see a doll of Princess Leia, but it is good for young girls to have to pretend that a boy, a fully biological boy in their locker room revealing himself to them is a girl. This is the left's perverse notion of justice. So I want to delve into this for a second and ask whether, indeed, the Princess Leia slave Leia costume is super anti-feminist, and it's really sexist, and it's really horrible. And let's start with what actually happens with Princess Leia. Now, as you remember, Princess Leia voluntarily sort of goes in as prisoner, right? She goes in as prisoner with the folks in Jabba's palace, and he dresses her up in this kind of sexy bikini, because for whatever reason, lizards are apparently attracted to sexy young women. And this giant lizard has her kept as a slave. Here's how that little tete-a-tete ends. It doesn't end well for Jabba the Hutt. Okay, for those who can't see this, Princess Leia, wearing a bikini, tossed a chain around Jabba the Hutt's neck and is now strangling him to death. Right? With the tongue wagging around and it's all weird. Okay, so we're done here. All right. And thus died Michael Moore. And so this apparently is anti-feminist. Now, I was under the weird impression that a woman killing her sexual tormentor was actually not anti-feminist. Call me weird, call me crazy. But I was under the impression that that's not anti-feminist. But apparently this is anti-feminist. Slave Leia must be stopped. Must be stopped at all costs. And the fact that many young men, many young boys grew up fantasizing about slave Leia, not because she was a slave, but because she was wearing a bikini. Okay, the fact is that the fantasies that young boys had about slave Leia was not the part with the chain around her neck. It was the part where she's wearing a bikini, right? And it was like PG-rated pornography. Okay, that's the reality for a lot of kids who were 12, 13 years old and watched this movie. Okay, but that's terrible, that's awful. But here are some things that the left considers truly feminist, truly feminist. Let's start with our good friend, Queen Bee, Beyonce Knowles. I believe this was at the was it the Grammys? She did might have been the Video Music Awards. She did she did this routine. She stood up in front of, she was dressed like a common prostitute, and she's dressed in front of a sign that says feminist. Now this is all in silhouette, but as the lights dimmed, you could see that she's basically wearing a very scantily clad unitard. I mean, that's what she's wearing. And she does this sort of thing regularly. This is the sort of thing that she was wearing, right? This is feminist, right? This is true feminism. So Princess Leia wearing things that actually cover her nipples is not feminism, but Beyonce Knowles wearing something that totally doesn't cover her nipples and is just body paint and her being naked on stage, this is true feminism. Also true feminism is the music video in which she goes down on her husband, which actually, there's a music video in which she does this. She's in the backseat of a car, and they participate in some Lewinsky activity. Okay, this is true feminism. Also true feminism is Lena Dunham. Lena Dunham, the star of HBO's Girls. She's a true feminist because she's ugly and she gets naked. So there's two choices here. If you are beautiful like Beyonce Knowles and you dress scantily, and then you just shout feminism randomly at the top of your lungs in the middle of public areas so we all think you're a homeless person, you're a feminist. And if you are Lena Dunham and you look like a warmed over manatee and you get naked eating cake in a toilet stall while sitting on a toilet, this right here is feminism. And that's the picture of the very androgynous looking, is that Jabba? No, that's Lena Dunham, not Jabba the Hutt. And so here this is feminism, true feminism. So feminism has destroyed all sense of femininity, And even all sense of females defending themselves, right? True femininity is being a whiny person like Lena Dunham, or being a woman. By the way, Beyonce is similarly whining about how women are put down in our society. Lady, let's get real for one single solitary second. Okay, you are extraordinarily rich because you're good looking and you can sing. Okay, for a woman who's been put down in our society, no, the only person who's degraded you is you by marrying Jay-Z. I mean, seriously, that is the only person, that's the only man who has degraded Beyonce. And I'm sorry, but dressing like you do in public is not a service to young women. It's not a service to young women, but that can be, but according to the left, that's a service to young women, but Princess Leia is not a service to young women anywhere. Also, true feminism is recognizing that true femininity is not Princess Leia defending herself from a crazed lizard. True feminism is this guy, this dude, Caitlyn Jenner. That's true feminism. And this is where we cross over the line from feminism into transgenderism, and now it's like a snake eating itself. Because now we've crossed over to the point where women are actually men, right? Where true feminism, and this guy won the Glamour Woman of the Year. Okay, he won the Woman of the Year. So men are better, women, sorry about this, men apparently are better at everything, including being you. We're better at everything, right? We're better at sports, we are better at building technologies, we're better at inventing things, and we're better at being women, apparently, according to the left. We're even better at being, we don't even have to cut off our dinghies in order for us to be better at being women, because Bruce Jenner still has all of his parts, okay? This is how wild, we have now departed from reality, and the goal of departing from reality for the left. So the question is, why do they do all of this? Why do they do all of this? And the answer is, because in the name of equality, everything must be destroyed. Everything must be destroyed. Because distinctions of any kind, inherently mean inequality. The goal of the left is what they say is the most happiness for the most people. The goal of the right is individual rights. It's a very different thing. The goal of the right is you have certain rights, we have to protect those rights because you're a human being. The goal of the left is not rights. They create fake rights, but they're not rights. The goal of the left is the most happiness for the widest number, and the most happiness for the widest number means us imposing our standard of what should be on you. And if it makes Caitlyn Jenner unhappy to be called a male, then we must all abide by these new rules. After all, what's the big harm if your 16-year-old girl has to look at a 16-year-old boy's penis if he thinks he's a girl? And this is where the left is going. All distinctions have to be obliterated. Because it turns out men and women are not equal in every way. Women are better at some things and not better at other things. Women are, for example, very good, much better at choosing sexual partners than men, right? Which is one of the benefits of human evolution. Right? The fact is that men are pigs. Men want to have sex with anything, rocks, trees, there's a reason that a male-only society would devolve into conflicting war and sexual activity until it died within 3 days. It would be over within 3 days. Just a place where it was only men and there was no hope of ever getting back to women, it would be over within 3 days. Right? Because women are better at certain things than men are. And men are better at certain things than women are. And so they're not equal in all ways. And because they're not equal in all ways, and the left believes that this false notion of equality is essential to human happiness, which is not true, they believe that happiness is derived from you not feeling inferior to anyone in any way. People on the right believe that happiness is derived from you fulfilling your duty. Right? This is actually a pretty significant distinction. For those of us on the right, this is true for religious believers especially. We believe that happiness is derived from fulfillment, from fulfilling your purpose on the planet, why you're here. The left doesn't believe there's a purpose for why you're here. So true happiness is really just avoiding unhappiness. True happiness is everybody pussyfooting around you to avoid your unhappiness. True happiness is you just sort of existing and people not stepping on you and being forced not to step on you. That's what true happiness is. And if you believe in that, then all distinctions have to be obliterated because distinctions immediately mean someone feels better and somebody feels worse. Linguistic distinctions have to be destroyed. There can't be such a thing as male and female. We have to obliterate it completely because if there are distinctions, some people are going to feel better at things and some people are going to feel worse. We have to get rid of basic notions of science. Science has to go out the window. There is nothing scientific about transgenderism, about this ridiculous notion that men can transform into women and vice versa. Nothing. There is nothing at all. It is completely ascientific in every way. But science has to be done away with because science makes distinctions. And eventually everything has to be done away with. The human nature has to be done away with. We have to just create these pod people, these androgynous pod people who are arbitrarily defined by their own subjective beliefs and what makes them. Here we are, folks. It is a Wednesday, and we have tons to get to. As always, here on The Ben Shapiro Show, we're going to get to, in just a little while, this Houston ordinance on transgender rights that just got voted down. We're going to get to Princess Leia. We're going to get to our Deconstructing the Culture segment because it is a Wednesday. Tons to get to. Stick around. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.
Tend to demonize people who don't care about your feelings.
Alrighty, so yesterday, Houston voted down this what they call the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance. The Houston Equal Rights Ordinance is basically a provision in Houston law that would force, quote-unquote, non-discrimination on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, and what they call sexual. Tiller, he said, while the administration generally does not take a formal position on specific proposals or initiatives, the President and Vice President have been strong supporters of state and local efforts to protect Americans from being discriminated against based on who they are and who they love. We're confident that the citizens of Houston will vote in favor of fairness and equality. The citizens of Houston voted in favor of sanity because it turns out that fairness and equality have nothing to do with me engaging in your delusion. The idea here is that gender identity, gender itself, is a social construct. It was just made up. And all this stuff about how girls are girls and men are men, all this is just made up. If we'd all been brought up as genderless, androgynous, weird creatures in some nether region of South America, then we'd all be better off because gender is a social construct. And the truth is that your failure to understand that gender is not a social construct is an individual construct. Okay, gender is a real biological thing, which is why my daughter is a girl and acts like a girl, and we all know what that means. And it's why I am a man and I act like a man, and we all know what that means. And we'll get deeper into these variations between men and women as the show goes on. But if you are an individual and you reject all of this, then we're now all supposed to engage in your delusion. So it's not fascistic. It's not fascistic for you to tell me that you're a woman even though you have a penis, and I have to treat you as a woman. That's not fascistic. What is fascistic is if identity, meaning that if I were living in Houston and I walked in tomorrow and I were no longer Ben, I were Benjamina, and I were wearing a dress, and I'd gotten a boob job. And I know it's a horrifying image for anybody who's picturing this, but if this all happened, that the Daily Wire would basically have to just deal with it. They couldn't do anything to me. They couldn't fire me. They couldn't do anything about it. And if I decided that I wished to follow Lindsay into the ladies' room, then also Lindsay couldn't do anything about it, and she would in fact be a bigot and a sexist if she denied my womanhood. This is what the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance did. It was voted down by a 2-to-1 margin. This was actually endorsed by Hillary Clinton, this piece of legislation. It was endorsed by the White House as well. The White House actually released a statement from, I decide that I don't want to hire you if you come in tomorrow dressed as a member of the opposite sex and tell me you've changed your name and your gender and now I have to treat you as a member of the opposite sex because I'm not a fully insane person. I'm not going to buy into that. Okay, so the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance goes down to flaming defeat. Now, this brings up broader questions about feminism and the nature of transgenderism. The theme of today's show is going to be this, folks, in a nutshell. Transgenderism killed feminism. Killed it, dead. Transgenderism has destroyed feminism. The entire basis of feminism is that men and women are different and that women should not be discriminated against for being women. And the entire basis of transgenderism is that men and women are not different. They're essentially the same.